Okay, I should be unmuted. Can everyone see my title slide, focus stacking in Adobe Photoshop?
Yes.
I see thumbs up. Okie
Yes.
dokie. So
Yes, I can see it.
the objectives of this presentation is at the end of this presentation, you, the participant, will understand how a photographic processing method called focus stacking can be used to improve your photography, and how Adobe Photoshop can stack, mask, and blend multiple images mostly automatically. Focus stacking actually has a couple of different names. It's also known as focal plane merging. It's also known as Z-stacking. And finally, focus blending. And that's the one that I think is most descriptive of the technique. But focus blending, focus stacking is a digital image processing technique. It's not a camera technique, which combines multiple images taken at different focus distances to create one resulting image that has a greater depth of field than any of the individual source images would have. So I have a little graphic here to try to explain it. Let's say you're out west, you're in Montana. You got beautiful mountains in the distance. You're standing on railroad tracks. You want to take a picture where your mountains in the distance are in focus, and the railroad tracks right at your feet are also at focus. This is going to be challenging. There are lenses that can do this. Not all of us can afford those lenses. But this is where focus stacking can come in to help. So here's a concept of a picture that we want to do. We can take multiple photos at different focal lengths. So as you can see on the right, we've pretty much focused on infinity, and we've taken one photo. Now in that photo, the railroad tracks at our feet are not going to be in focus, but the mountains in the distance will be in focus. Then we'll take a second photo, kind of focus for the mid-range here. So now the mountains at infinity are maybe a little blurry. The railroad tracks at our feet are a little bit blurry, but the midsection is focused. And then finally, we're going to take a third photo where we focused at the railroad tracks at our feet. Now, in reality, it's going to take more than 3 photos, but just for our demonstration, we'll work with the 3. So we have our 3 photos. Now what we need to do is we need to make any areas of those photos that are not in focus transparent. So we take our first photo that was focused for infinity. We keep the part that is in focus in the distance, and we make what's at our feet through the midsection transparent so we can't see it. Then we'll take our middle photo and remove what's at infinity and what's at our feet. And then for the third photo, we'll just remove everything except what's at our feet that's in focus. So now we have 3 photos.
John, can I ask you?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question, John?
Yeah.
When you say, do you just crop the picture?
No. Okay. Let me back up a minute. Computer programs can do all this. This is a very labor-intensive technique to do on your own. Photoshop and other software can do it for you. But I still think you need to know what steps the software is doing so that you can take the pictures better and give the software better pictures to work with.
Yeah.
So that's why we're going through it. Yeah, don't let this, yeah, I understand it's really technical and maybe there's an urge to mute me and watch some cat videos. Um, but, most of this can be done by software, but I'm just showing you right now the steps that are done in this process by the computer. So what they're doing, Lee, have you ever worked with masking in Photoshop?
No, I haven't. A little bit once when I was using Photoshop. I don't go with Photoshop anymore.
Okay.
I just again, I see the pictures and it looks like they're just cropped. I'm just interested on when you say make the transparent.
Right.
Um, I wasn't. I'm not following what you're saying. I'm sorry.
I cropped the graphic for the demonstration. So yes, they were cropped. But if I was working with the photos, I would actually create a layer mask and I would mask out the part of the photo that is not focused. And if you were
Okay,
to
I
look at it,
understand.
if you were to look at it on your screen, you would see the focused area, and then you would see Photoshop uses a hatched background to show you what's being hidden. Um, you'll actually see this a little bit later when we go through pictures that have been masked. You'll see it. Okay, so we have masked the unfocused areas of our three photos. Now we need to line them up. They're all layers in one photo, but we're going to line them up so that we end up with one visible photo that's actually made up of just the focused area from the three photos that we took. That makes sense? So focus stacking can be used in any situation where individual images have a very shallow depth of field. Some very good examples of this are macro photography and optical microscopy. Those types of photos have a very, very narrow depth of field. But I also know landscape photographers that use it. They'll take a photo of maybe a field that starts right where their feet end, and the mountains are all the way out in the distance, and they want everything to be in focus, so they focus stack. So it doesn't have to be just macro photography. It can really be done for anything. So I'm going to walk you through an example here of focus stacking. So here I am in my backyard a little bit earlier in the summer when the daylilies were blooming. And I wanted to take macro photos of a daylily with my micro lens. I have a Nikon 105 millimeter micro Nikkor lens. So with this lens on my tripod, the higher the magnification ratio, the smaller the depth of field is at any aperture. So the first thing I did was I set up my tripod, I had my camera on there, and I focused on the flower I wanted to take a photo of. And that flower was 19 inches away. Then I had to figure out my depth of field, and I have an app on my phone. This is a free app that's available for Apple and Android called Digital Depth of Field. And I started by, I put my camera into the app. I put the focal length of my lens, it's a fixed lens, 105 millimeter. I had already done my light meter reading, so I was shooting at an aperture of f13. And I had focused at 19 inches away, which is 1 foot 7 inches. And this app tells me that my depth of field for this setup is 1/2 inch. Now that doesn't sound like much. Let's look at the photo. I want to really get picture the photo from the very top, shooting through the bottom of the photo at the back. And I'm holding up a ruler here, and I've circled and marked what 1/2 inch depth of field is. And as you can see, it's not very much when you have a flower that is, you know, a couple of inches tall. So how can I get this photo? My options are I can increase the depth of field. The easiest way to do that is to increase the light, but I can't do that in this case because I'm out in the bright sun and I don't really have additional lights that will make it even brighter. So that's not an option. I could decrease my shutter speed, uh, which would give me more light and increase my depth of field. But this is a flower outside in the wind. That's usually not an option. I can increase my ISO, but I don't want to do that either because that's just going to basically increase my noise. So I can also change my focus distance. The farther away that I am, the greater my depth of field is going to be. But I don't want to. I want a close-up photo of this flower. I could change the focal length of my lens because wide lenses give you a greater depth of field. But I want to use my macro lens. I only have one macro lens. So that's not a good option either. My final option to increase my depth of field is focus stack. And in this situation, it's the only thing that's really going to work for me. So here I have two photos that are basically the same. The one on the left is just one photo that I took, and the one on the right is what I'm going to end up with at the end of this presentation, where we're going to merge 14 photos together. So look at the one on the left, the single photo. I've circled in white what area is in focus, and I've circled in red what area is out of focus. Remember, we just have the 1/2 inch depth of field. But the photo on the right, I've taken 14 photos, all focused 1/2 inch apart, and I've stacked them. And you can look at that photo, and you could see where every part of that flower is really in focus at this point. So that's what focus stacking can do for you. So if you're going to focus stack, here's some tips. One, use a tripod. It's extremely difficult to handhold your camera and try to get 14 shots that are focused 1/2 inch off for each shot without moving a bit. So a tripod really comes out. Use a cable release or a timer because anytime you push on your camera to take a picture, you introduce movement or vibration that can be picked up. Use manual camera settings, including white balance, because you don't, as you're taking your 14 photos, you don't want the camera to suddenly change your aperture or your focus. I mean, or your white balance. You want that all to stay the same. And take lots of images. Ideally, you want the depth of field to overlap from one image to the other. So here's our steps. One, shoot your photos. So here I am taking a picture of my daylilies. You can see down in the bottom left corner where I've kind of spaced out 1/2 inch the different areas that I have focused to get this image. Again, use a tripod, use the same camera settings, and incrementally focus your photo through those 14 focus steps. Again, this is not a camera technique. It's going to be a computer technique. So we need to download our photos. I've downloaded them to my computer. And you can see I have the 14 photos on my computer now. They, from a distance, they all look like they're identical photos, but they've all been focused half an inch apart. Load the images into Photoshop as layers. So those that are not familiar, Photoshop works with a file, which is typically one photo, but you can add layers to your one file. And these layers can be additional photos. So we're going to load our 14 photos into Photoshop as layers. And we do this by going to File, scroll down to Scripts, and scroll over to Load Files into Stack. Then Photoshop is going to give us a window asking us, what files do we want to use? So we're going to hit the Browse button. There's my 14 files that I've navigated to. I'm going to highlight them all and hit the Open button. And you can see near the bottom here, there's a check mark in front of Attempt to automatically align source images. Even though the camera is on a tripod, as you change the focus, it's going to change where your flowers actually line up. So Photoshop will attempt to align them. I'll show you that in more detail in a little bit. It's kind of neat. You can do it manually if you want. I always let the computer do it. So I check that box. And then, there's the layers. Each of my 14 photos is in my layers panel in Photoshop. Next step is to align the layers. I said you could do it manually. You could also let the computer do it. I recommend let the computer do it. Why do we need to align? All lenses suffer from what's called focus breathing to some extent. Focus breathing means that as we adjust the focal point of our lens, the scale of our scene actually changes, even when the position of the camera does not. So what I've done, I've taken two photos, two of my 14. I opened up photo number 14, and then I stacked photo number 7 on top of it and made it halfway transparent. So you can see how things change just by changing the focus. And they just don't line up. You would expect them to line up if you haven't moved your camera, but as you change your focus, it really does distort your image. So there's all my photos loaded. I've ticked the check mark to automatically align. Then I'll hit the OK button. And they're all aligned at this point. Then I need to focus stack the layers and mask them. So I have to select all my 14 layers. And then I'll go to Edit and Auto Blend Layers. And now and tell it I want to stack the images. My choices are make a panoramic image or a stacked image. And then the computer is going to take a bit of time, probably about 2 minutes, to line these photos up and to make transparent the parts of the photos that are not in focus. So each of my raw images that I've used, they're all 38.6 megabytes. I got 14 photos. So that's a little over half a gigabyte of data to work with. It's going to take about 2 minutes for my computer to do this. So sit back and just relax while your computer does it. But Photoshop will now create layer masks for each layer to blend the image, making out of focus areas transparent. And here's an image of photo number 11 of my 14. So Photoshop has made transparent the parts that are not in focus, but it left visible the parts that were for each of the 14 photos that we've taken. And when we look at all 14, then we're going to end up with seeing just the focused areas of those 14 photos in basically one photograph, but with 14 layers. Now, then we have to look for masking errors because this is a computer. It's trying to line things up. It's trying to hide what it thinks is not in focus. It can make some errors. And here's an example of an error when I was making this photo. I've circled it in red. So at this point, you have to make the decision, all right, am I going to go in and edit that layer and fix it, or am I just going to crop it out or some other way remove it? And in this case, I don't think it really adds to the photo at all, so I've made the decision to remove it. But if I was going to fix it, here's the layer. You can see where my problem is in the bottom right of that. Now, that's where I would go to remove that part of the photo or fix it. Then we have, remember, we have 14 layers, so now we eventually have to merge them into one. So we do that by going to Layer, Flatten Image. And after we flatten it, we can remove any errors with the healing brush. So here I've removed that part that didn't quite line up right. And then finally, we need to crop. And remember, I showed you how we have to align the photos because they don't, as you change your focus, you distort them to some degree. So when you get done with your 14 photos and you merge them, look at my borders on this photo. The borders are not good because the photos have been aligned. So I'm going to manually figure out how I want to crop this photo, and then clear out the edges that don't have any data in there. There is an option on some photos where you can let the computer make up data to put in those blank areas. I don't like doing that, but some people do. And then when I get done, now I did all this with raw photos, so now I can use Camera Raw to finish post-processing my photo before I save it as a JPEG. And here's my final shot. If you look at it, everything on that flower is pretty much in focus, even though this lens only has a 1/2 inch depth of field. So we are going to, okay, now I'm going to go to Photoshop and actually walk you through the steps in real time. I think my screen sharing stopped. Let me get that going again. Okay, where is my, there it is. So share screen, Photoshop. Okay, so here I am. So first thing I'm going to do is load my photos into Photoshop. So I'm going to go to File, scripts, and then load files into stack. It wants me to select my files. So I'm going to go to my folder. There's my 14 raw files. Going to select them. I'm going to tick the check mark to automatically align my images. And then I'm going to hit OK. And now Photoshop is loading them, and it's going to align them. And this is going to take probably less than a minute. You can see over on the right in my layers window that it's adding each photo as it does it. We'll just give it time to load those 14. Still doing it. Remember, this is about half a gigabyte worth of data. Now it's aligning the different layers based on the content. You can see the progress bar as we go through this. We're halfway done. Now we have to select my 14 photos. So I'm clicked on the first one. I'm going to shift click on the bottom one. Now all of them are selected. And we're going to go to Edit. And we're going to go to Auto Blend Layers. Click on that. Here's my option to make it a panoramic image or a stacked image. We've picked stacked image. And now the computer is actually looking at those 14 photos, and it's deciding what part of each photo is not in focus. And it is applying a mask to each of those images so that the unfocused parts of the photo will no longer be visible. And this will probably take about 2 minutes to do, because again, we're dealing with about over half a gigabyte worth of data. Slowly and surely, it's going to get it done. It really is neat that there is software that will do this, because you know, if you had to do all these steps manually, it would take hours probably to get it done right. And I really don't know how anyone could have done this before computers. I've never met anyone that did anything like this with film. So I think this is one of those examples of better living through technology, which is something I don't often say.
Stacking was done with negatives back in the old days, but it was done with large negatives, 8 by 10 and so on, and laid them on a light table and cut them out with a razor blade and then laid them back together. This was very common in advertising photography.
Yeah. I bet that was difficult to do.
It paid extremely well, and most of the time was done at nighttime after everybody went home, because yes, it took a tremendous amount of concentration. Ansel Adams even printed prints out, then would cut a print away and lay it on top of another of the same print and rephotograph it.
Okay, so now all my 14 layers are aligned and they're masked. So my next step is I need to make this into one layer. So I'm going to go to in Photoshop, go to Layer, and I'm going to come down to Merge Layers. And now I've merged them all into one layer. And finally, to finish this up, I'm going to have to remove the area that I want to cut out in the bottom left corner where it didn't do such a good job. And then I'm going to need to crop that image. Oops. And there's my image. So at this point, I can go.
John,
Yes,
quick question. When you went to merge it, didn't you flatten first, or is that the same as flatten image?
I did not flatten until right near the end because I needed my 14 layers.
Right, right. So when you went to layer, then you went to flatten image and then merge?
The steps I did to flatten my image, yeah, I went to layer and then I went to flatten image. Is that your question, Laura?
It was. Thank you.
Okay. So then at this point, the only thing left to do is, because these are raw files, is to go into my camera raw and go ahead and fix this how I want to fix it, and just do my normal processing. But what's kind of neat is we now have an image that that we created from 14 different photographs to get everything in focus. So that's the end of the presentation. Does anyone have any questions?
I am so going to learn this.
Well,
Yes.
you know, this has been recorded, so you know, you should be able to go through it on your own and practice it. It's not hard. It really isn't. Let me shut this down. And
Yeah, we'll take about 5 minutes of questions. After that, if you have a question, send a message or something to John. And hopefully Mike is getting his presentation ready to go. Any other questions?
I would just say, Susan, that when John brought it up, it kind of flashed on the screen as an option, but you can do this the same way with doing panos. And so when you shoot across a wide width, you know, a landscape or whatever, Photoshop will stitch those together too, just kind of the opposite direction, and works really well.
Good.
I will take that presentation and save it as a PDF document and make that available on our Facebook group so that you can just open up that document and walk yourself through it.
And put
Hey,
that in the
John.
files. You put that in the files section,
I
John?
will. I will.
Okay. All right.
Hey, John,
Yes.
what do you do to compensate, like, for the air movement in that there? I know you have your shutter speed up pretty high, but I know what I think I asked you this question online, that some of the pictures you take are really, I mean, some of them, they're all really nice in that there. And I ask because when I go out to take them in that they're handheld, you know, I'm always getting the wind blowing and that there. So how do you, and I know you had a tripod for that, but how do you compensate for that wind, or just wait till it doesn't blow?
Okay. Well, yes, I try to wait for the wind to die down. But my big secret advantage is I have a clothespin tied to a wire that wraps around a tripod leg. And when I set my tripod up, I put the leg next to the flower, and I can put the clothespin on the flower.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. You know,
Everybody has their secrets.
we all have our secrets, and I'm happy to share mine.
Okay,
Thank you,
here's
John. I
one.
appreciate that.
Here's one. You're out there taking your picture of that flower that's going to be having several different shots, and you start off and it's sunny, and then suddenly you get several clouds that come through and will not clear. Do you pack it up and go home, or do you compensate in some other way?
If the lighting changes drastically during the shoot, and if it looks like it's not going to go away, you just start shooting again. I mean, it doesn't. We're taking 14 photos, and you know, there's a couple of seconds between each one while I move my focus ring. So if I have to start over again, it really isn't that big a deal.
Hey, John, I have one.
Sure.
Did I hear you right? Did you say you take the ruler to your tripod to measure the distance there? Or what was that ruling on there? Was that taped to your, where you could view it on your screen of your camera?
Okay. Repeat your question, Jeannie.
Okay, in one of your pictures, it looked like you had a ruler in front of the flower.
Oh yeah, I held that up just to show that my half an inch depth of field is not going to work on this flower. I did not need that ruler to take the photos. I was just trying to emphasize that the depth of field of my lens was not going to work on this photo, and show you why.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering.
Is 14 the magic number, or could it also be 10 or 18, or is that just the ideal number?
No, the reason I picked 14 was it's a 7-inch flower,
Mm,
and I
okay.
have half an inch depth of field.
Okay.
So that's where I ended up with 14.
All right.